Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. This week, we are covering the drama around the one big, beautiful bill, potential Bitcoin tax fixes coming up soon, the House Crypto Week coming up, an interesting Reddit thread, and more. Remember to follow me on X at MorganSternNJ and follow the pod on Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. So, Zach, let's get right into it. Where should we start?
Okay, well, let's start with the one big, beautiful bill, which was signed into law by President Trump at the White House at a 4th of July celebration, which was his sort of self-imposed deadline. And from someone who was watching on TV, there were fireworks, B-2 flyovers, there was the bill signing. It was a wild event, but you were there. And we're going to talk more about that later in the show. But I'll say this, on TV, it was pretty cool. And before we get into the substance of the bill, I want to mention all the drama surrounding the passage of the bill. So we're former Hill staffers, and I have to say, watching it from the outside, the drama, the theatrics of it, I really enjoyed it. So first you had Senator Lisa Murkowski came around, and she was the 50th vote. She got a shout out, by the way, from the president, which is, I wake up every day and I'm still surprised by things. But so she was the 50th vote. That allowed J.D. Vance, the vice president, to cast the tie-breaking vote. Then House members threatened a mutiny because they didn't like the Senate changes. So Speaker Mike Johnson calls the bluff, and he brings up the rule for a vote. That vote was held open for a long time. I actually had that on TV. They held it open for a long time. Maybe there's about 10 or 12 or so Republicans that waited to vote on the rule. Then it was on its way to a deadlock tie. I think it was 216. They pulled out the votes they needed to adopt the rule. Then Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries used his leadership privilege known as the Magic Minute to give the longest speech in the history of the House floor, 8 hours and 44 minutes. So, Brian, when I was in the Senate, we always said the majority controls the agenda, the minority controls the clock, and that's what we had happened here. And so we'll get into the substance of the bill, but just I talked about kind of what happened, but what's your take on all the drama and the political work that goes on behind the scenes? Because that's what we saw. And then do you see any parallels between kind of what happened here with reconciliation, the one big beautiful bill, and a big bill like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which you worked on in the previous administration?
Yeah, so I think politically, the Democrats were united in opposition. They determined that this is the president's signature legislative package, and they're going to oppose it with every fiber of their being so that there would be a clear contrast, I think, in the midterms. Now, I might question the wisdom of that, opposing the tax cuts for mostly lower and middle class Americans, and their refrain that this is tax cuts for the rich. I mean, it wasn't true last time. It's not true this time. Politically, it may play. We'll see. But that was their political calculation, their decision. The Republicans had a much more complicated scenario because there's so many different factions of the caucus. The SALT caucus, who live in blue states with high state and local taxes. You had your deficit hawks, House Freedom Caucus, among others. You had a man as an island, Thomas Massie. In the Senate, you had, I think, the senators. There aren't really Republican senators from these blue states, so that they really wanted to push back on the SALT caucus. There was some more, I think, deficit hawkishness, maybe a little bit more back and forth about EV credits and some of the green energy issues. So it was this patchwork quilt of people that they had to cobble together, that they essentially did with the sheer force of will of the president. I mean, that really is kind of what it came down to, but they got it across the finish line. And now, whether they loved it or hated it and then had to vote for it anyway and hold their nose, now they have to go out and sell it. And so two key parallels. You asked the question of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I see two key parallels. One, a last minute haggling and negotiations. Um, in the first Trump term, we leveraged not just the president and him visiting key districts, which he did, but we had other spokespeople in the administration. Secretary Mnuchin is where I was at that time, working for him at the Treasury Department. Really, the closer for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was Ivanka Trump. I think she doesn't get actually enough credit. She was face to face with senators at the 11th hour closing that deal. This time, I think it was the president himself on the phone at 2:30 a.m. Closing these deals. The other, I think, sort of parallel here is that they're going to have to go out and sell this, and it's going to be a very key issue politically in the coming, year plus, leading into the midterms. And I think they're doing a decent job. They've gotten some good polling data on these Medicaid cuts, showing that people actually do support work requirements for Medicaid. Um, so I think turning the mainstream media narrative on its head on that one to show that it's actually good for the debt and deficits and the spending power of everyone's dollars. That'll be a key point. Energy independence, of course, closing the border. These are popular issues for the president. So, I think flipping the argument on Medicaid and then focusing on the benefits for lower and middle class Americans will be the Republicans' task. It was very difficult with the media united against us and Twitter united against us. And now, social media, new media, it's a little bit more balanced playing field. So it'll be very interesting to see how that dynamic plays out with the administration selling this signature legislation this time around compared to last time around. Those are my initial takes on it, but very interesting drama indeed.
It is. And one of the things that I realized very early on when I was in the legislature, and this is a hard thing, like, to gently and lovingly remind voters, is that you don't get to vote for 80% of a bill or 90% of the bill or the part of the bill that you like. Is you vote yes or no or present, or you don't vote at all, but you vote yes or no on the bill that's in front of you. And so I don't know the congressman, but he was from New York. He was the guy that was leading the salt charge. They had him on a couple interviews, even I think while the rule vote was being held open, and he was giving his thoughts on things. And yeah, would I have liked it to be better? And blah blah blah. Some people, they would have liked to have seen this thing in there, that thing in there, this thing not in there. But ultimately, it's the package that you have, and it is amazing the united front that the Democrats did have on it. They did control the clock, but ultimately the majority controlled the agenda, and the bill was passed and the president signed it. You kind of talked about this at the tail end there, but kind of just moving kind of beyond the politics. The things that are in the bill, why is it good for America? Why is it good for the economy? Why is it good for the future?
Well, tax certainty is critical for business development in the U.S. Um, Codifying or making permanent a lot of the tax cuts that benefit lower and middle class Americans was important. And to be clear, this talking point about how it's tax cuts for the wealthy actually offends me, because I live in Virginia is not a very good tax state. Like, this is probably a pretty bad bill for me, but I think and it's very progressive in the sense that most rich people's taxes are not going down under this. I think that is a kind of a false narrative. If you live in a high tax state, or you have a home whose prices have gone up over the last number of years, and so you have a lot of mortgage interests, like, this is probably pretty bad for you. Like, it's probably not that great for like higher tier income earners. Most of the benefits go to people who earn between $50,000 and $200,000 a year. That's kind of the sweet spot. And less than that, you're probably have a zero federal income tax liability anyway. So but it increased like the child tax credit and other things. So it could actually reduce people's tax bills from zero to even less than zero, to getting credits for the lower income tier. So it's not very good actually for rich people. It's quite good to have this kind of certainty and tax cuts for lower and middle income earners. No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security. I mean, these are things that are benefiting, um, that are going to make a big difference for those taxpayers. So um, I think that is good. We should have a strong middle class in America. I think this strengthens it. I think it provides businesses, small business relief that they extended immediate expensing to encourage manufacturing jobs, a blue collar boom, for more opportunity, not just lower taxes, but more opportunity for people. It's encouraging more investment and job creation in the U.S. So it's a very important bill on the tax front. Funding our border security operations, I think that's like a signature issue that the president got elected on. So that I think is critically important. Um, Energy independence is part of this. If America can supply, we have enough energy in this country. We have enough, you know, natural gas and other resources to provide our own energy and to be a net energy exporter, which is good not just for America but for national security and the international, like, Pax Americana. I mean, part of the reason why Putin was able to invade Ukraine was because Western Europe, Germany, and others were buying a bunch of energy from Russia. If they're buying it from the U.S. instead of Russia, maybe his war machine isn't quite as strong. Um, if uh, if other countries are able to work with the United States instead of our adversaries, Iran is another one, then it's going to be good for not just the American economy, but for like world peace. Like this, it's underestimated the importance of this bill, I think. So I didn't love everything that was in it either, but the alternative was reverting to the pre-Trump tax cuts tax regime, which actually probably was better for rich people, worse for lower and middle income earners, and was kind of living in this like Green New Deal fantasy of energy policy and perpetuating the open border crisis, which people were so fed up with that they voted Biden out of office and voted in Trump. So I don't know. That's a really long answer, but it's a long answer because there's so much in this bill. I mean, that's why they called it the one big beautiful bill. So, which is a lot catchier, by the way, than the big ugly bill or whatever the Democrats called it. They're just not as good at branding as President Trump. That is for sure. But I think the tax certainty, encouraging manufacturing jobs, encouraging a blue collar boom, cutting taxes for lower and middle income earners, closing the border, all these things were very, very important for the Trump presidency. And had it not passed, I think it would have really kind of kneecapped or, been an Achilles heel for this entire presidency. So important bill, and good that the Republicans were finally able to get it across the finish line, but not without some trials and tribulations.
Yes. Well, there were a lot of good things in there, and if we can take a moment and have our lament, one of the things, unfortunately, that was not included in the bill was some of the Bitcoin tax fix issues that we've discussed. They weren't included, but we can take heart because Senator Lummis unveiled a comprehensive draft digital asset bill, a tax bill. It's pretty big. There's a lot in there. It's a draft. Senator Lummis is, kind of seeking stakeholder input so things can change. But this is the first concrete vehicle that we've had for proactive, this session at least, for proactive Bitcoin changes that we didn't see in reconciliation and that we haven't seen so far in the market structure conversation. So pivoting over to that bill, Brian, what are you seeing in that so far, and what are some of your initial takeaways?
Yeah, so a couple of key concepts, particularly for Bitcoiners, and there are a number of tax provisions in there that I think maybe reflect views of the broader crypto industry, but particularly for Bitcoin, If you're in the mining space, if you're an individual miner at home, or if you are an industrial scale miner, um, you believe that Bitcoin's not being taxed appropriately or fairly or legally. The only guidance that exists is from 2014 during the Obama administration, and they put out guidance saying that if you mine Bitcoin, that is recognized immediately as taxable income. However, the SEC, CFTC, and federal courts all agree that Bitcoin is a commodity, which means that it should be like self-created property, like farm products, corn, wheat, like oil or gold. And so it should be taxed when you sell it, not when you like create the property. That would be the appropriate tax regime. It would be easier to administer because you'd have a fixed price at which it was sold. A lot of mining is done in pools. It can be difficult to determine the exact price when it was mined. It would be a much fairer and easier way to administer the tax code for Bitcoin if they would treat it like a commodity, like every other agency treats it. Now, her language, I think people are don't love it yet because I think it talks about like deferred income instead of treating it, the same as commodities. So that's something I think she'll get feedback on for sure. Another key provision, I think, in her package is a de minimis exemption. So if you're transacting with Bitcoin, let's say you're buying a cup of coffee or a loaf of bread or whatever, um, every little transaction like that is treated as like a capital gains taxable event. So if the Bitcoin appreciated from the time that you bought it to when you're spending it, you have to then calculate your capital gains and pay for the associated accounting overhead and everything. So it disincentivizes people from using the premier digital asset as a medium of exchange. So she wants to include a de minimis exemption. Her proposed level, I think, was like $300. I think that's too low, to be honest, but anything is better than nothing. But she'll probably get some feedback that having cap gains on a commodity that's also a currency will discourage its use. Now, the Czech Republic, for example, my understanding is they eliminated capital gains taxes on Bitcoin for transactions if you hold it for more than 3 years. I think that's a great public policy outcome. I don't think the United States is going to get there yet. So I appreciate her effort on this. And like I said, anything's better than nothing. But I think the Bitcoin community is probably the chorus that I see, at least on X, is like no cap gains at all. And if you hodl for more than a certain period of time, it should just wash away. That would be amazing. I don't know that that's politically feasible, but that de minimis exemption is a very critically important point. There's something kind of for everybody in here: miners, stakers, exchanges. There's a lot of different ideas in here, but the two key points I think for Bitcoiners are ending the double taxation on mining rewards and creating some kind of exemption so that people can actually transact with Bitcoin. I think those are probably the two most important for Bitcoiners. So glad she's seeking feedback. The Ways and Means Committee is having a hearing on digital asset tax issues next week, which is great because they haven't really worked on this stuff, even though the industry has, Senator Lummis has, other, particular members have. There have been some pretty good tax bills introduced in prior Congresses. So it's nice that the actual tax rating committee is taking an interest in this. And I think the industry is going to swarm and provide all their feedback in a very fulsome way and try to help them get this right, because it is really, really critically important for making America the Bitcoin superpower of the world and the crypto capital of the world, as President Trump has said he wants to do. So big developments. We'll see how it all shakes out.
There are. And, in addition to that hearing that you mentioned, the House, the week of July 14th, they're calling it Crypto Week. So in addition to rescheduling that Ways and Means Committee hearing, they're going to consider the Clarity Act, which is the market structure bill, the Genius Act, which is the Senate stablecoin bill, and an anti-CBD surveillance act, which is also good public policy. And the House, they I know they were trying to get the rule in order for considering these bills, but it appears that they answered the sort of looming question: are you going to consider clarity and genius together or separately? President Trump, asked the House to consider them separately and just send Genius Act to him clean. So we'll see what happens there, but that's next week. So we've talked about some of those other bills before, Market Structure and Genius Act, and we've talked about CBDC a little bit as well. But we're finally getting to the point where the talk ends. And as we mentioned, you don't vote for 80% of a bill, you vote for the bill before you. So on those issues in particular, market structure, stable coins, CBDC, and even this tax issue that we just talked about, what's your crystal ball on where this is going to go?
I think that with all the disclaimers, I don't know for sure, but here's my best guess is that the House is likely to pass the Senate's Genius Act for stable coins and send it to the president and get a win on the board. That then gives you tea leaves to read in terms of how big is the bipartisan majority. There are some Democrats who are going to vote for this. And then that'll allow you to figure out, okay, so where are we for the broader market structure issues? You can start with that winning coalition and try to keep it together and maybe build on it. For the Clarity Act, I think it got a lot more support by including Congressman Emmer's Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act to make sure that, for example, miners or other validators on blockchains are not treated like banks, because they're not, and that you have a right to custody your own Bitcoin if you want. I think that probably broadens the coalition of people who will support it. And then, so if they probably have the votes in the House, it's just a matter of how big that bipartisan majority is. And if it's quite substantial, I think it makes it more likely that the Senate would take that, because if the House is being sort of forced or cajoled, or however you want to say it, to take the Senate's stablecoin bill, the Genius Act, then I think there'll be some horse trading. Well, we took your bill, so you take our bill on market structure, and look how many votes we got. Of course, you need 60 votes in the Senate. I think one of the key questions here on the Clarity Act, I think the Genius Act is likely to pass and go to the president. For the Clarity Act, will the Senate Democrats do what they've done in the past, which is take an opportunity to hit the president for their perceived conflicts of interest? And I'll get into that in a second. That his family businesses are in the crypto industry. Therefore, we have to have like prohibitions on a president being in the crypto industry or something. That I don't think is a winning strategy, because there's so many voters looking for alternatives to the legacy financial system. We saw it with the Bitcoin Voter Project, Stand with Crypto, and the Coinbase and others saw it in races across the country, that this isn't a partisan issue. There's actually a little bit more Democrats than Republicans who hold digital assets. So focusing in on this like weird niche political issue, I don't think is a winning strategy. But we have to see if enough Senate Dems are willing to break free from leadership and vote for the Clarity Act. If so, the House version has a chance of going through. Although I will note Senator Lummis and others are working on their own market structure bill. How close to the Clarity Act that is remains to be seen. So these are the moving chess pieces around. I think the ideal process from the president's perspective, I don't work at the White House anymore, I can't speak for them, but my guess, if I were them, I would say the ideal scenario is the House passes the Senate's Genius Act, and then the House passes the Clarity Act, and then the Senate passes the House's Clarity Act, and we get all this done in the next, in the coming months. Maybe not before August recess, maybe before August recess. If not, I mean, that's been the president's goal. If not, then maybe early in the fall. Get these issues taken care of, have all that goodwill from a very burgeoning and large industry and large voter bloc a full year ahead of midterm elections. I think that's the dream outcome for the president. Whether the Senate plays ball, only time will tell. We shall see.
As my college professor would always say, tune in, tune in, tune in, and we'll
And
see.
one other thing on that, the conflict point, just because this is important. If certain members are going to be hyper focused on the president's holdings of digital assets, which are in the billions of dollars, his net worth has increased quite a bit since the Trump family businesses have gotten involved in the digital asset space. I think the Republicans should say there is a big difference between conflicts of interest and alignment of interest. So he believes in this industry. When we met with him during the campaign, we could tell that he was genuine. He really does want to see alternatives to the legacy financial system. He wants to see more people empowered. And he put his money where his mouth is. Before he was even running for president, his businesses started to get involved in digital assets. So, and then his policies were explicitly, publicly, clearly aimed at making the US the Bitcoin superpower of the world and the crypto capital of the planet. That is an alignment of interest. A conflict of interest would be if he's making public policy to stuff money in his own pockets and hurting other businesses, like blocking out competitors. That is not what's happening. Everyone has the potential to benefit from more access to digital assets, clear rules of the road, fostering more investment in this in the United States, helping the US progress faster than our adversaries. This is an alignment of interest. This is not a conflict of interest. And I think the Republicans ought to lean into that point as this debate progresses.
I think that's a tremendous point. And this is, I don't think, a very persuasive point, but one of the things that President Trump does, I mean, he's an entrepreneur. He makes things, he builds things that have value. And we can say some of the stuff that he's, getting into, cell phones and Bibles and all these things, we can debate about that. But the difference is you have a president who came in, who was worth a lot of money and continues to build and grow things versus, presidents in the past. You had a governor from the backwater state of Arkansas, who came into the White House, and now they're worth probably 8 figures or something like that.
Backwater state of what do you have against Arkansas?
I have nothing against Arkansas.
It's the home of John Daly. They are, and Sarah Sanders, two great Arkansas.
I love Arkansas. I love Arkansas. We're gonna visit Arkansas and the Ozarks later this year. But you have a governor from a small state who comes in, gets in the White House, and then gets rich from, I don't know, speaking and writing books that like Hillary's book that no one bought, and so. There's going to be these familiar talking points that people can throw lob back and forth. But the point that you made is this isn't about the president trying to hold back an advantage himself. It's opening up a path for everybody. And, and we'll see how sizable that group of Democrats, frankly, that glom onto this, because right now it's been, Maxine Waters and her acolytes. And we'll see what happens. But at least, as you said in the House, I think the Republican votes will be there for a lot of this. And it's how bipartisan do we want to make this, or at the Bitcoin policy conference, how everyone tried to shun that bipartisan word and say this is nonpartisan. We'll see how big that tent gets, and to eschew the politics of it is this is good public policy. So hopefully they can get that done. I want to pivot over to another topic, an interesting article that I came across on Yahoo over the weekend. It was entitled Bitcoin's 5% Problem, Why Most People Still Don't Own Crypto and What That Means for Its Future. And so the article recapped a Reddit thread, and it asked the following question. If only 5% of the population owns Bitcoin, what is the use case? It's an interesting question. It had an interesting and spirited debate. One commenter referenced Satoshi's paper and said, Bitcoin is explicitly designed to function as peer-to-peer electronic cash. That's literally the title. Another commenter said, Bitcoin is not a currency. It is not designed to be used as a payment vehicle. It is designed to be a safe harbor for your money while government ruins your fiat. Another common thread was the precious metals comparison. And another commenter said, I don't own gold so that I can take it to Walmart to buy a TV. I own gold because its supply cannot be inflated like fiat currency, and therefore its value will increase. And finally, another interesting take was what the author of the article called the "we're early" argument. So one commenter said, adoption is not linear, it's exponential. We're still early. Early always looks confusing until it's obvious. So Brian, that's kind of like what the article said. This is what the debate was about. But what's your take on not only this article, but the broader conversation? And then maybe to get to the heart of the question that sparked the debate, if only 5% of people own Bitcoin, what is the use case?
Well, I'll take issue with the 5% of the population owning Bitcoin. I mean, Coinbase is, and others, many other studies, including, I think, at least 2 surveys that were presented at the Bitcoin Policy Conference, suggested that it's tens of millions of Americans. Before the election of 2024, and before Bitcoin ETFs were approved, I think, before some of these mass access points even happened, it was like 50 million Americans. That's 1 in 6 Americans own it. So it's not 5% of the population. It's much higher than that. And it's presumably now much higher than that 50 million number. We already know it's hundreds of millions of people around the world. So there's my first bone to pick with this argument. As to whether it is a store of value or a medium of exchange or a unit of account, well, it's all of them. But as we just recapped, the tax rules in the U.S. make it really hard to use it as a medium of exchange. It tactically, I suppose, I don't know if that's the right word, tactically, it's becoming much easier to use as a medium of exchange because, like, the Lightning Network is allowing people to use it virtually instantaneously. PayPal, you can use it like on your phone like you would anywhere else. Strike, Cash App. There's a number of ways you can use Bitcoin to pay for things if you want to. Tax rules make it a little onerous, but it is mostly now, because I think that it's difficult to use as a medium of exchange because of the rules. I think it has been primarily a store of value, an investment, a commodity, an investable commodity. And it has grown from nothing to a $2 trillion market cap. This is not like some niche asset anymore, although we are still relatively early because the institutional investors are coming now. Sovereign investors are coming now. Strategic Bitcoin reserves are popping up around the world. And we saw research presented on that at the conference as well. So look, the part of the phenomenon that is Bitcoin is that it is a medium of exchange, a unit of account, a store of value. It's all these things. It is a digital commodity. It's a fascinating asset, and it's the best performing investable asset. I believe I keep seeing this reported of the last decade. Pomp just reported, Anthony Pompliano, is a great newsletter, just reported this morning, over the last decade, it's up 38,000%. I mean, not too many other assets have performed like that. And the amazing thing about it is that, usually to find an investment like that, you have to do a lot of research. You have to see potential revenue streams, growth in user base if it's a tech company. With Bitcoin, it's math. There's a capped supply and virtually unlimited demand. And with governments around the world printing more money, Bitcoin is becoming more valuable because math. So it is an amazing thing to behold. So interesting takes throughout this article. I think a lot of the takes were correct. Even they thought it had to be one or the other. I actually think it can be a lot of these things. But my main bone to pick is with this 5% number. That is nonsense. It's total garbage. Way more Americans own it now than 5%. I mean, like I said, before the election, it was over 50 million. And I think it's even more than that now. So, and it's Republicans, Democrats, and independents, people across the political spectrum. So, I don't know. Interesting take. I like to see that the Reddit thread fights. It's always interesting.
Yes, they can be interesting, and they're not always let's say the bastion for truth or accurate information. But it was an interesting article. It was a noteworthy conversation, and one thing I heard somebody say yesterday was, there might be a perception among some people that, well, I didn't get in on Bitcoin when it was worth $1, or I didn't get in when it was worth 20,000, and now it's worth over 100,000. And there's this maybe concern that people are like, well, I didn't get in early enough, so I'm screwed, or whatever it is. But they talked about that growth not being linear, exponential. And so whether you got in 5 years ago or 5 minutes ago, that trajectory is still there. And you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. I think sats go out to like the eight decimal places or something like that. So you can buy small units of Bitcoin, and you can hold it for all of the purposes that they talked about in the article. And heck, maybe one day you can take it to Walmart and buy your TV. We will see, but I won't be taking my gold to Walmart to buy a TV. I want to go to our final segment, ended in the traditional way, the grab bag segment. And I just keep going back to the same well because it is such a good and deep and rich well. Formula One. There was a historic British Grand Prix at the iconic Silverstone track 75 years ago. This is where Formula One started. They're celebrating it, their 75th anniversary. Nico Hülkenberg of Sauber, 37-year-old man who's been in Formula One for over 15 years, 239 races, got his first podium. He started the race in 19th in not a very good car, but he ended the race in third place. And he even got a trophy that was made out of Legos, which was funny because the 20-something drivers that were Formula One and Lego, they have a new partnership. And these 20-something drivers next to him, they are like, this doesn't make any sense. This is stupid. He loved the trophy because he likes Legos, but he also has a daughter that loves to play with Legos. So it's a win-win. But there was, as the commentators said, it was a perfect summer British day. There was rain. There were safety cars that dominated the first half of the race. 5 of the 6 rookie drivers crashed out or retired. So this was really as much a survival and a strategy masterclass as it was a pure speed race. So Nico Hülkenberg, it was a great story. As somebody who is the same age as him and who has young kids, like for somebody to work so hard for something and have this kind of payoff is huge. And for a team that is not very good, but they're building, they're on the way up. And I'll give a shout out. I'm not a big Lando Norris fan. So for everyone that loves Arkansas and Lando Norris, please send your hate mail to Brian's Twitter. But I'll give a shout out to Lando Norris. He won his home race for the first time in his career. And we're at the halfway point, 12 races down, 12 races to go. The 2 McLaren drivers are separated by just 8 points at the top of the chart. So great race, great weekend, great first half of the season. Can't wait to see what happens in the second half of the season.
Nice. Well, for my grab bag, I just want to say that I had the most American 4th of July celebration maybe ever. Except for like the original 4th of July. My wife and sister and our daughter started the day at Mount Vernon, George Washington's house, for a U.S. citizenship naturalization ceremony for 100 new citizens from all around the world, with a special guest from Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor of California. And he gave basically a pump-up speech for these new citizens, telling them that whining is weakness. It is time to get to work. It was It might as well have been like a Hans and Franz sketch. It was hilarious. It was great. Everyone loved it. Very patriotic. And then, so that's how we started the day. And then we ended the day at the White House. Uh, we, the White House had a great 4th of July celebration. It started, I did not make it into the first part where it was the actual bill signing with the president. And they did the B-2 flyovers, but I was able to go later and mingle with and saw a lot of old friends, a lot of great people from the Trump administration. And of course, I wore my American flag shirt to be as corny as humanly possible. And we just had a great time celebrating America's birthday. So visiting our first president's house and then our 45th and 47th president's house for the 4th of July. Happy birthday, America. It was a great day. Well, I think that wraps it up for us this week. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a nice review if you like it. If you don't like it, keep it to yourself or just hate tweet me like everybody else does. On X, follow me at Morgenstern NJ. And tune in next time for the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. Thanks, everybody.